Welcome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Lisa Butler. I'm going to be the moderator for this session. We're going to start with just a quick overview of what we're doing today, talk a little bit about how you can interact with us. We would really like to hear from you. That one of the important things about these sessions is there's a lot of time for question and answers, and we just would love to have you be part of that process. We're going to talk a little bit about the setting for SGMA, what the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, what it is. I'm looking at the attendance list. I'm thinking this is a fairly sophisticated group, so we probably don't need to spend a lot of time on that. We'll just kind of zip through that quickly. Talk a little bit about what East and West Turlock is doing, what's going on with the website, and sort of what the process is in terms of iterations. Herb will be doing that, Herb Smart. Then we'll do some question and answers if there are any, and then deep dive into the water budget. We'll explain what one is, talk about what the math looks like, and what the implications of the water budget are as far as the overall process. And then from there, we'll move into more question and answer, and then just wrap it up and talk about how you can stay connected. We're also talking about potentially moving to some evening meetings. We'd love some feedback about that. We want to make sure that the people that are interested in this process have a chance to participate in it. So with that, Marissa, do you want to give a real quick just intro to how to use the Zoom and how to interact with us? We're very comfortable with you using the chat. And you can post questions that way or through the Q&A, whatever is the best way for you to communicate it. Go ahead, Marissa.
Yes, and so can you see this slide full screen?
We can indeed.
Good, all right, so this is a Zoom webinar. We are recording this. The meeting will be posted online afterwards. So you can submit questions at any time. We will have that actual formal question and answer portion towards the end of this meeting. But if you'd like to submit a question, you can go ahead and click Q&A down here and type in your question. If you put it in the chat, we'll also see it. So you can do that as well. When it comes to the question and answer period, you could also ask your question live by raising your hand, and we'll unmute your microphone. You could also, again, as I mentioned before, submit your question non-verbally. That option is up to you. And that's it. If you have any questions, if you encounter any technical difficulties, I will be online for you. Just shoot me a chat and we'll work it out.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I'm going to do some quick introductions of our panelists. So first of all, I have some, as you already met me and Marissa. Debbie, do you want to just introduce yourself real quick?
Hi, I'm Debbie Montalbano. I'm with the Turlock Irrigation District, and I am helping to facilitate the development of the GSP for the West Turlock Subbasin GSA.
Thank you. Karen?
Hi, sorry, it took me a second to unmute. I'm Karen Morgan. I work with the City of Ceres. I'm also Vice Chair for the West Turlock GSA.
Thank you. And Lacey?
Good afternoon. I'm Lacey McBride. I'm with Merced County. Merced County is in actually both the West Turlock GSA and the East Turlock GSA. I'm currently the Vice Chair for the East Turlock GSA's Technical Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Michael Cook?
Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Cook. I'm with Turlock Irrigation District, and I help chair the West Turlock Technical Advisory Committee.
Thank you. And Mike?
Titsa, I'm a hydrogeologist, and I'm coordinator for the East Turlock Groundwater Sustainability Agency.
Thank you. I'm going to turn this over to Herb, Herb Smart. He'll go ahead and introduce himself, and he's going to give you some background on SGMA. And Herb, as we get started, where do salmon keep their money?
Salmon keep their money in the riverbank. As we were joking with the semi-funny jokes during the preparation portion of this meeting. Thanks, Lisa. So good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Herb Smart. I work for Turlock Irrigation District, and I'm a member of the Turlock Subbasin's Technical Advisory Committee. And I'm just here for a couple quick seconds, really. As like Lisa said, this is a sophisticated crowd. I'm sure we all pretty much know what Sigma is, but I'm going to set some context and then we'll get on to the meat of our presentation today. So, of course, what is Sigma? It's probably very ubiquitous now in California water and on these webinars, but the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, I've been telling people for a couple of years, really, we have three things to do in the Turlock Subbasin. One is we had to form GSAs, or groundwater sustainability agencies. We've done that. We've formed two. We complied with that portion of the law. Secondly, we have to develop GSPs, groundwater sustainability plans, by 2022 in our subbasin to manage the subbasin through at least 2042. And we are working on that. We're going to hear more about that today. And then lastly, the GSPs through the GSAs through the GSPs have to achieve the results that we've developed in the GSPs to avoid unsustainable management through what are called the sustainable management criteria and the avoidance of undesirable results. And so you'll hear a lot more about that throughout the process. And so that is Sigma in a nutshell. Currently in our subbasin, we are working on a 2 GSA, 1 GSP approach. It's been what we've been doing since the beginning. And so we're working toward that. And you're going to hear specifically today about Chapter 5, the water budget chapter of the GSP that's out for comment. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more at the end of the meeting how we can comment on that. Just to note, we have a website at turlockgroundwater.org where you can download all the information about this meeting and others. And I'll talk more about that toward the end of the meeting. And then lastly, this is a long-term process. Those of us familiar to Sigma know that this is, this began in 2014, 2015 timeframe, and we're working towards 2042. And so, we're going to try and move quick, but it's still a slow process. And so, even once we turn in the GSP, we have updates every 5 years. And so it's very iterative and it's a very long-term process. So just to note that. And then lastly, I know Lisa mentioned it earlier. We heard some comments at the last groundwater lunch hour a couple of weeks back for the need to hold these in the evening. And we certainly want to note that we've heard that. And we're working toward that, at least one or many to be held in the evening in the future. But we had already booked this time slot, and as scheduling goes, we weren't able to do it in the evening. So just wanted to note, we always get really good feedback, and we wanted to mention to stakeholders who are on this call who may have given that feedback that we're working toward that, and we hear you. So thank you for that.
That's great. We also changed the meeting platform based on the feedback from the.
Good point. We are now on Zoom as opposed to GoToMeeting, and so, or GoToWebinar. So noting that too. So always good feedback, always appreciating that. And on that note, I'll hand it back over to Lisa to see where we go from here, and if we could get a check-in from the audience.
Absolutely. And we are getting some feedback already. And Red has asked me about how many folks are here that aren't panelists, and we've got 17 in the audience right now. And so thank you all for being here. All right, why don't we, are there any other questions? And Amanda said, thank you for switching to Zoom. So yeah, that I know that's just been so hard for people to go back and forth between all these different technologies. And those of us that go to meetings all the time, it's no big deal. But if you're a member of the public, that just was a great suggestion. So thank you, Amanda. Anybody else, comments, questions? Feel free to use the chat. Feel free to raise a hand. Okay. And once again, it's a pretty sophisticated audience, so we probably don't need to spend a lot more time. All right. Are you ready to hop in, Lacey? Ready to talk about water budgets?
Let's hop in. Thank you to Herb for running these slides for us. So again, my name is Lacey McBride with Merced County, and I'm going to give you a broad overview of the Chapter 5 water budgets. Previously, at previous groundwater lunch hour meetings, we did get a presentation on chapters 1, 2, and 4 in the basin setting, and so this is Chapter 5. The slides that I'm sharing here are adapted from slides that Woodard and Curran and Todd Groundwater, the technical team, helping to support the Turlock Basin, put together. And so Again, this is a really broad overview. If you're looking to get more details on the water budget and more detailed slides, we have those available, those when they're given in either GSA meetings or our technical committee meetings. And so those are available on the turlockgroundwater.org website. And Herb can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there also might be some meeting recordings available to listen to those meetings as well, to hear directly from Ali Tagavi and Phyllis Stannon with Woodard and Curran and Todd. So next slide. Great. So water budgets are a required element of our groundwater sustainability plans. That regulations require 3 different kinds of water budgets: historical, current, and projected. The regulations also require reporting on the change in groundwater storage, which is modeled through this effort as well. Next slide. So you can think of a water budget similar to the way that you think of your own checking account, maybe. A water budget accounts for how much water enters the basin through percolation, stream seepage, or imported water, and how much water leaves the basin through, say, groundwater pumping or subsurface flows. In the Turlock Basin, the water budgets were evaluated using a numerical model, the IWFM Integrated Water Flow Model, C2v Sim. This was released by DWR, and it's been refined for the Turlock Basin. It was recommended by DWR for Sigma for GSP development, and it'll be used by DWR to evaluate the GSPs. And so we're using it here in Turlock as well. Next slide. Coming. Great. So while this model was developed and calibrated based on the latest and the best available data and information, there are always uncertainties associated with models. And so the model will be refined and updated in the future as more data becomes available. And the water budget information presented should be considered as the first estimate. So there are some uncertainties, including structural uncertainties, boundary conditions, and layering, data uncertainties. So aquifer, water budget, groundwater level, groundwater movement information is limited. Calibration uncertainties, the ability of the model to accurately reproduce observed conditions is a variable. It's better in some areas than others. And then projected uncertainties, the future land use, groundwater use, and surface water availability are all uncertain. Next slide. So using the C2v Sim model, the technical consultants for the Turlock Basin put together 3 water budgets as required by the regulations and a projected water budget with climate change. So the 3 different conditions is the historical condition, which uses the historical land use, water use, and hydrology, which is the hydrology from 1991 to 2015. The current conditions water budget uses the 2010 land use, 2010 water use, 2010 hydrology. And then the projected conditions uses projected future land and water use, and it uses the baseline hydrology of 1968 to 2019 and projects that forward. And then that same with some climate change simulations.
Lacey, before you leave this slide and maybe one of the others want to hop in, you made mention of a model that was used, and we do have some folks on the line that are somewhat knowledgeable. Is there anyone on this call that's able to provide just a little bit more information about that model and why it was selected? And it's okay if not, but I was just curious. Mike, is that something you can answer?
Sure. So there's a variety of different, there's 2 main models in the Central Valley that a lot of folks have used as a starting point. One was developed by the Department of Water Resources, that's C2v Sim. And that's the one that's being, that the model for this subbasin was extracted from. And the other is CVHM, or the Central Valley Hydrologic Model from USGS. The advantages of using C2v Sim are that DWR uses it for evaluation of water budgets when they review the GSPs. The hydrology of C2v Sim, the historical hydrology and water budget information that's in it is up to date through 2015, whereas the current version of CVHM, it's only up to date through 2003. And then some of the adjacent subbasins were also using C2v Sim, so it seemed like it would be natural and efficient, to produce, a model and an evaluation that maybe could more easily speak to what's going on in the other subbasins if that's what was used. So, if I may have missed some of the logic that went into it, but those are the big things that I know that kind of stand out.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And I realize that for some of you that might be in the weeds, but I'm looking at who's in this meeting, and I thought that might be relevant to some of the people in the meeting. So thank you. Thank you, Lacey.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. So Herb, we'll go to the next slide. So when we talk about the historical and baseline timelines, we're looking at the hydrologic period of the years that are within kind of the brackets here on the slide. You can see our baseline condition is from 1968 to 2019, and you can see that there's a variety of wet and dry kind of cycles that have been identified in those years. And you'll also see in the historical period, there's also the wet cycle and the dry cycle. So we have a good variability of years that we're including in this model for the different wet years and dry years. Next slide. Great. So right here, we're looking at the kind of land and water use, and we're looking at the demand. So you can see we have all three of our conditions: historic, current, and projected. And then we have our ag demand and urban demand. So that is all of the demands on the groundwater. And then we have the supplies, what is available to meet that demand. And so in the historical, well, in all three, you see we have surface water deliveries, agricultural pumping, and urban pumping. And so these elements are incorporated into the model as we put together this model to run it. You can see just slight changes. I guess I would point out the ag demand in the historical. You can see between historical and current that it has gone up a little bit. You can see between current and projected, the urban demand has increased. So there are slight changes in these numbers. Let's go to the next slide. So another element that we're feeding into this model is the net groundwater use. And I've got kind of 3 slides here. We'll look at the historic, projected, current, and projected as well. And this, if you look at these charts from the center line of 0, anything above that center line is basically water that's going into the groundwater. So that's canal and reservoir recharge, deep percolation, and then anything below that center 0 line is water that's leaving the aquifer, so that's groundwater pumping, and this is on the chart on the left. You can see the difference between the West Turlock and the East Turlock GSAs is the canal and reservoir recharge, and that's due to the West Turlock GSA being an importer of surface water. And then on the table on the right, we have the net recharge. And again, anything above that center line is a positive of recharge, and anything below it, you can think of that as water coming out of the groundwater basin. And so for the Turlock Subbasin as a whole, it's a negative of recharge, so it's water coming out of storage. For the West Turlock GSA, you can see there's a positive net recharge. And for the East Turlock GSA, you can see it's water coming out, it's a negative number. And again, you're gonna see that going back to that West Turlock GSA as an importer of surface water. So we'll kind of go through the next couple slides pretty quickly, because I think, click to the next one, please. I think you'll see there's just slight changes. It's a little too hard to see those changes if you're not looking at them side by side. So we'll go to the next one after that as well. But we'll make these slides available, and then you can look at them more closely in detail if you'd like. Next, there we go. So now we're going to look at the modeled water budgets. And we'll go to the next slide. So this is a confusing slide. This is a great slide, but it's a confusing slide. So this is the modeled groundwater budget from our technical consultants. Again, anything below the center line is water that's leaving. That's so if we're looking at our checking account, anything below are the checks that you write, and anything above is deposits coming in. And so you see your green of deep percolation that's coming into the groundwater basin, into the aquifer, canal and reservoir recharge in the purple. Below the center line, you can see groundwater pumping in gray. The blue is the stream and aquifer interaction. And so that can either be groundwater that is leaving the groundwater basin and discharging into the waterway, into the river, or it can go the other way and it can be water from the river that's seeping into the groundwater system. I think the color to note on this slide are the orange tabs, and they signify groundwater storage depletion or groundwater storage increase. And as noted earlier, the change in groundwater storage is an element that the GSP or the GSAs have to report back to DWR. And so it's noted on here that the groundwater storage increase is below the gray, and then on the upper part of the chart is the groundwater storage depletion. And I think maybe it'll make more sense if you look at, say, year 47, way on the right, and you'll see the pumping number is quite high, and that's 47 of your projected budget. And so you can see you have your historical period, and then we have our projected period. So year 47, you see how large the pumping is, and then yet you see how small the deep percolation and the recharge is, which means the orange tab that has to make up the rest of that pumping is coming out of groundwater storage. And so that's a depletion in groundwater storage. So let's go to the next slide. So still talking about groundwater storage, you can see the trend that were projected in this modeling exercise. You can see in the blue is the historical conditions, and you can see in the historical conditions, the change in storage is reducing into 2000 to 2015. And then you can see the orange line are our projected conditions, and the projected conditions are also reducing during that baseline projected period of 50 years. Let's go to the next slide. So this is another view, I think, of the table that you looked at before. It shows how the water, I think what I would highlight here is the change in the water from storage and the change from the gain from streams. And so you see in your historical condition, the gain from streams is, if we're comparing just block sizes, right? Because I don't want to get too deep into numbers. Between the historical conditions and the projected conditions, you have your gain from streams is increasing in the projected conditions, and yet your water from storage is decreasing in the projected conditions from the historical conditions. And while stream depletions alone are not necessarily defined as an undesirable result, the interconnection between surface water and groundwater is a sustainability indicator that the GSAs have to monitor, and that could lead to undesirable results if they progress far enough. So the GSAs do have to define what an undesirable result is for the interconnection between surface water. And so while we're reporting the change from storage from DWR, we can't make up that change from storage out of stream depletions, I think is the message here. Next slide. Oh, and there it is with circles. Thank you. Thanks, Herb. So the next couple slides are the water budget diagram. I think these images give you some good numbers if you really want to start looking into the numbers on what the groundwater pumping is, percolation, precipitation. But I guess what I would point out as a takeaway on these next two slides is looking at the groundwater system, that delta in storage. And so for the historical conditions, the change in storage, it's a negative number. It's 64,000 acre feet annually is coming out of storage. And if we go to our next slide, so that's the historical condition. The next is the projected condition. And again, we'll just look at that delta in storage, and it's a change in 8,000 acre feet annually is in the projected condition. Well, again, you might think, oh, that's a positive thing that we're not removing as much from storage. But again, you can see that's made up from the stream system and impacting the sustainability indicator of the interconnection between surface water and groundwater. Next slide. So now we're gonna look at climate change and the climate change scenario. So DWR requires each plan to analyze a projected water budget under climate change conditions. And so using climate change models, the data projecting the climate change was downscaled from those models into a regional planning scale. And then the data from that regional planning scale is fed into the C2v Sim to estimate the projected effects of climate change in the Turlock Basin. So next slide. So we'll just jump right to the effects that we've modeled for the Turlock Basin, and we're looking at both precipitation and evapotranspiration. And so you can see on the chart on the left that the climate change 2070 scenario is in dark blue, and then our projected baseline condition is in the light blue. And you'll see that under climate change, we're projecting wetter winter months and drier summer months. And then I think you'll also see that kind of reflected in the chart on the right, which is looking at the evapotranspiration. So that's really the water consumption of crops. And the climate change is the dark green. Climate change 2070 scenario is the dark green, and the projected baseline condition is the light green. The bottom scale is months, so that's October to September. So you can see in those summer months of June, July, August, that under the climate change scenario, there's a higher ET rate in those hotter, drier summer months. Next slide. And so what does this mean for the Turlock Basin GSP or Turlock Basin water budgets? And so due to those projected impacts on the previous slide, the conditions with climate change is anticipated to reduce the average annual storage to 19,000. Sorry, wait a second here. Is anticipated to the reduction in storage would be 19,000 acre feet annually. So if you remember the delta on that table, the graphic we were looking at earlier had a projected condition of a reduction in storage of 8,000 acre feet. If you layer on the climate change conditions, that increases to 19,000 acre feet annually of reduction. So it's an increase in reduction from storage of 11,000 acre feet. Next slide. So our final scenario that we modeled is an estimate of the sustainable yield for the basin. And the goal here is to estimate the volume of groundwater that's available under sustainable conditions defined by Sigma. And so we're using the model to assess the minimum thresholds that the Turlock GSAs have selected for the groundwater levels, groundwater storage, interconnection of surface water, and land subsidence, which uses, they all use groundwater levels as as a proxy, so they have minimum thresholds on groundwater levels. If we go to the next slide, we'll kind of look at all of the sustainability indicators that Sigma identifies. So Sigma identifies 6, and the Turlock Basin is using 3 of those. Well, we're also using land subsidence, but we're using water levels as a proxy for 3 of those. We're using the water levels at the base of, I believe, the top of the Corcoran clay for the land subsidence as well. And so feeding our minimum thresholds into the model, go to the next slide, we do get our results of what the sustainable yield in the Turlock Basin is. And so for the Turlock Basin, we're estimating the sustainable yield to be 311,000 acre feet per year. And our projected groundwater pumping is estimated at 414,000 acre feet per year. So already we see that projected conditions cannot continue without having an overdraft in this basin. Projected conditions are more than what would be sustainable in the basin. So as we talked about in some of the very early slides, that think of this as a first round of the water budget. This is the same thing with the sustainable yield. It will be refined as more data becomes available. Sustainable yield is something that has to be achieved and maintained over wet and dry years. So it's an average over the 20 years. So we have 20 years to get to that 311,000 acre feet. And we're going to do that through the development and implementation of projects and management actions, and also through demand reduction actions, which could be land repurposing, it could be allocations. I think both of those things, projects and then management actions that include demand reduction, are going to be a part of Chapter 8, I believe, which is a coming up chapter that will be released. That's going to be it's going to show the plan for the GSAs to achieve that sustainable yield.
So just I'll quickly just see, Herb, do you all have an outline of the plan that we can share after Lacey's had a chance to talk?
Yes, I'll be able to give a quick synopsis of the chapters that are out and where we're going and where we've been.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Lacey.
No problem. And Lisa, you came in pretty close to the end, because I think my next slide is just questions. And so I know that was a really broad overview, and I think it was probably pretty quick as well. I think I went through 25 slides in a pretty fast pace. And so happy to answer any questions. And I know we have other expertise on the panel as well here who can help answer any questions. Like I said earlier, more details and more information has been presented to both the GSAs and the technical advisory committees, and all that information is available on the website, the turlockgroundwater.org website as well.
Great, thank you. Red, I see you have your hand up. You're welcome to talk. You're muted right now, but feel free to ask a question.
Yeah, this question is to Lacey on the presentation. There is bar charts, and there's 3 bars, and I think it shows historic, current, and projected.
Can you go back to that, Herb, to that slide?
And
Working my way back there now.
Okay.
One of those 3 bar charts explains the use of water, where it's going to, and then the other one, a couple pages down, or maybe the next page, shows where the water's coming from. It's coming out of storage, or it's not. Anyway, the question was on projected. It looks like the East Turlock GSA projected is not to change. In fact, it's to continue taking water out of the ground. But we know, or I think we know, projected can't be taking water from the ground. We're out of balance. So we have a severe imbalance on the East GSA. And my understanding is we have 100,000 net benefit in the West GSA because percolation from surface water being put on to irrigate. So projected, my question is projected, it shouldn't show the East Turlock GSA continuing to take water, or maybe it's too soon. Maybe it's too soon to ask that question.
No, I don't think it is. I think you're spot on. So the projected water budget isn't projecting any change. It doesn't include projects. It doesn't include a reduction in a demand reduction. Those are things that will be modeled by the technical team in the projects and management actions chapter. So what you see in the projected water budgets is if we use our historical land use, our projected, which again is an estimate of what is our land use going to be, our estimated land use going forward, and our estimated water use, and then we project that over the 50 years of hydrology that we've seen in the past. What does that look like? And you're absolutely right. What it results in is an overdraft, a continuing overdraft beyond the sustainable yield of the basin. So the projected water budgets don't include what you identified right there as the need to change either projects, groundwater use, or management in the basin to come to sustainability.
Okay, good. Thank you for that answer. I appreciate it. The next item, this is the first meeting I've heard of demand reduction. We talk about projects and management actions. Projects and management actions are going to get us to a balance in the Turlock Subbasin. And now I hear about demand reduction. So is that like, is demand reduction, what is it? What would, give me an example.
It would be a management action, and it could be something like fallowing land, reduces demand, repurposing land, allocating groundwater or groundwater pumping, allocating it in a certain way to growers. Those are all decisions that the GSAs have to make on how they want to manage the water that they have. You know, if they're going to put in their projects, and if their projects don't meet the need to reduce, there's going to have to be other actions that take place in order to meet that. And that's going to be those management actions to reduce demand.
Okay.
So I don't think anybody could tell you what exactly is going to be put into place in the Turlock Basin to do that and to achieve that. But those are all options available to the GSAs.
Okay.
And I would just open it up to Mike or Debbie or anybody else who had thoughts on management actions as well. I think you'll hear more about that in an upcoming chapter.
Red, you and I haven't met. Could you tell me a little bit about you, like how, what you're interested in? Do you live in the area, or what is your, what makes you interested in this meeting?
Yeah, Lisa, I'm a farmer in the Turlock Irrigation District. As a note, I am also a retired employee from the electrical side of Turlock Irrigation District.
Okay.
I grew up in the Modesto Irrigation District. My parents farm in Modesto. I've farmed here since 2002. Bought a 20-acre ranch. I have a domestic well which has gone dry from pumping by TID's pumping shortly after I built the house. So my interest in groundwater has only gone up since, my domestic well went dry when I'm trying to move into a new house. And then during the last drought, I had just planted a new crop of almond trees, and I planted in 2011, and then we had the drought in 14, 15. And so I was going to lose my investment, and everybody was drilling wells, and all the wells were going dry, domestic wells, between Houston and Denair. And that's where I'm at. So I did drill an ag well, and I don't use it. I intend to use groundwater as a last resort. I'm in TID. I have access to surface water, so I use surface water.
Great. Well, I thank you so much for introducing yourself to me. It just helps me understand a little bit more, because sometimes I can help ask questions that are, provide you with good information.
If there's anybody interested in water, it should be me. The water, I overlie, the groundwater, obviously. That water has gone down 20, 25 feet since I've established a domestic well.
Yeah. Well, I noticed I've been hearing from some of the other panelists who, one of the things that they mentioned, demand reduction can also include urban water conservation. So there are a lot of different options, and I think what Lacey was saying is that in terms of the management actions, that there are more decisions to be made. So did you have any other questions, Rhett, that you wanted to put up, or?
No, that's it for now. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We very much appreciate it. There was a question about deep percolation. That was one of the things that you referenced, Lacey, in your discussion. And does that mean, what exactly does that mean? Is that like subcorcoran, or what does that mean?
So the percolation of that's applied water that's percolating in. Mike, you might have to help me out. I don't believe we're talking about subcorcoran, because we're not looking at percolation that goes below the corcoran clay. This is in the upper aquifer or in the outside of the corcoran clay principal aquifer.
Yeah, because you said deep percolation. Like, what does that mean? That was the question. What does that mean?
In hydrogeologic terms, it's a term that's applied to water, applied water that percolates below the root zone and recharges the groundwater table.
And so in addition to that question, then the person is asking, if so, what's the lag time that it estimates for the water to reach? And they're referring to it as the lower aquifer, but you're not, correct? Help me understand that.
So in IWFM or CVHM, in the parent numerical computer codes for that, it doesn't include a lag time. It assumes that recharge is applied directly to the water table during the year in which it occurs. And the reason that that's an acceptable simplification is because exactly what year it reaches the water table is not as important as the changes that you see in the groundwater system over time. So the model's not intended to predict exactly the year that you might see a rise in the groundwater levels or a fall in the groundwater levels, but what the overall patterns are and how to best manage those.
Okay, great, thank you. And the person that asked that, if we didn't quite get it right, just ping me and let me know that I need to re-ask it. And we did also get a question about there was a reference that was made that you can't make up the depletion in the groundwater just from the inflow to the subbasin from the rivers and streams. That was something that someone heard in the presentation. And so they're wondering if that may or may not be true in all cases. Is there a particular reference that you're using when you're making that assessment?
So I guess I'm making a broad statement there that one of the sustainability indicators in Sigma is this interconnection between surface water and groundwater, and we have to look at that. And especially in the Turlock Basin, the agencies who are I don't know if managing the right word, but who have water rights on the rivers, on the Tuolumne and the Merced, have identified what they think is an unsustainable depletion of surface water. And so for the Merced River, I believe it's, Debbie, is it fall of 2014 is the minimum threshold is the water levels at fall 2014, because we didn't want to see the depletions in the Merced River go beyond what they were at fall 2014. Is that right, Debbie?
It's 2014, but I can't remember if it was the spring or the fall. I think it was the fall. But it is 2014 along the Merced. And the cone is shifted a little closer to the Merced River, and we were seeing larger impacts along the Merced River than the Tuolumne. And the Tuolumne, I think, is 2015 levels.
And so it's really river stream dependent on what level of depletion from the stream into the groundwater is acceptable to the basin or not. So it's kind of I made a broad statement that making up loss of water storage from streams is not going to be acceptable. To the level at which you do that, like Debbie said, it's different for the rivers in the basin, and the GSAs determine that through their minimum threshold determinations.
Okay, thank you. Anybody? John Brody, I see you're here in the audience. Was there something in particular that was interesting to you about this meeting? I know you're working on the Delta Mendota stuff.
We're just interested as a neighboring subbasin in, what some of the other subbasins are doing, how they're looking at things, and just an interested observer. That's all.
Yeah. What are there differences in the way that you calculated your budget as compared to what you're seeing here?
Well, I wasn't here when they put the different plans together here, and I would have to do a little bit of a deeper dive than I've been able to do so far.
Okay, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, we do have 6 GSPs here, and I'm not sure which one of them, comes or which number of them may come close to the Turlock GSA. So
I believe it's the north central that pretty much follows the entire basin, the basin boundary between Turlock and Delta Mendota. But then, the exchange contractors GSA is just right in there as well. It's maybe not touching the boundary, but it's right there as well. So the Delta Mendota is a lot of complex GSPs.
Yeah.
yes.
Well, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, John, but I think it's always nice to get the insight, because one of the things is that you really are looking at coordinating, and you want to understand what's going on throughout the region. So I probably will put you on the spot again at some point, but at least for now. Okay. I see a note from Kevin to everybody, and you're explaining about some numbers. Kevin, do you mind if I open your mic? Would that be okay? Go ahead.
Okay, I was just responding to the questions in the chat, that's all.
Yeah, no, please, if you don't mind though, keep going.
Yeah, Matt had wondered how much overdraft is on a per acre basis for each area. And I assume you mean West Turlock Subbasin and East Turlock Subbasin. And I was just replying to that, to Matt, to say that that number could be easily calculated using the 104,000 acre feet per year deficit that has been calculated by the model in chapter 5 there that Lacey explained. And but what you have to remember about that number, though, is that's projected future deficit, assuming no project or management actions. So all the future chapters after chapter 5 are, okay, well, how do we address this overdraft? And what projects are we going to come up with to make the basin more sustainable? And so, as Lacey pointed out, the joint TAC meeting this afternoon will actually be going through some of that. So you'll see this 104,000 acre feet per year number actually being reduced by projects and management actions. Mainly projects this afternoon we'll be talking about, not so much the management actions. So I just wanted to address that. And then there was another question from
Joseph.
Mr. Gallegos there, and inches per year. I assume, Joe, you're a farmer and that you're wondering how much of the 48 inches you're going to get reduced. And again, that could be easily calculated. You just need to look at the net numbers and by the acreage, and that's how TID comes up with the numbers when they say they're going to give you 30 inches a year or 48 inches a year. And you could convert that to inches. So it's just mathematics at that point, but it can be calculated.
Thanks, Kevin. And Joseph, if you'd like to talk, feel free to do so.
Yeah, I would. So that's the issue I have is just how many acres are applied to each district. So then I could do the calculation. The number of acres, agriculture acres wasn't listed.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see.
So can you put that in the chat so we can write those down?
Yeah, if somebody else knows numbers off the top of their head, I'm not sure what they are.
We'll track those down for you, Joseph. If we don't have them right on hand, we'll get you an email back to answer your question. Mike, did you want to add to this?
Yeah. So the question, the way the question's being framed in terms of overdraft per acre or sustainable yield per acre, those are important ways to look at this. But it's also important to keep in mind that we're not talking about a checking account for one area and a checking account for another area. We're talking about 20 accounts that are interlinked in different ways, and an action in one affects all the others in varying degrees. So, the question of overdraft per acre is not the only way to frame that question, and not the only way that needs to be considered when deciding what management actions and what demand reduction necessary. So I just wanted to put that on the table. And in recognition of that complexity, what Sigma says is that you don't have to achieve sustainable yield on day one. You have to achieve it in year 20. Or as Walt is fond of saying, we're building a great ship, but it's still in dry dock. I think that's an excellent analogy. And then ultimately, the real test for what management actions are needed and how far they need to go is not the calculations that we make based on a model or based on a spreadsheet. It's what we actually measure in terms of the aquifer response. So that's just some important perspective, I thought.
I see that that Joseph has his hand up again, so I want to make sure I get to him quickly. Believe it or not, we're at the end of this hour. I cannot believe how quickly the hour went. But Joseph, go ahead and put your last thoughts in. And if we don't get it answered today, we're going to get back to you and make sure that you do get answers to your questions. So yeah. Please, if there's something else.
Yeah, it was, I just want to frame why I was asking that question. I understand that there's 20 different bank accounts to pull water from, but as a farmer, pushing 1,000 acres, I have to plan ahead where my water is going to come from and how the value of that agricultural income to the region. If I'm only going to be able to grow 800 of those acres, I need to be able to plan for that. So that's why the question was presented as just a general number, and then we could do the calculations from the different sources.
Thank you. I'm going to actually ask my presenters, can you all stay on another 5 minutes? Because I do have more questions and I hate to shut it down. If you can't, please let me know. But if you can, I'll let this run over about 5 minutes if that's okay. Okay. Looks like everybody's okay. They don't have looks of alarm on their face, so we'll keep going. Let Matt Brady, I see that you've got a hand up. Would you like to ask something?
Yeah, could you just go over the anticipated timeline for releasing the rest of the chapters and putting out the full draft for public comment?
Yes, that's going to be the last item that Herb's going to cover. So we definitely will do that. And then I do see one more question from Rhett. He's asking about how the conjunctive use change for TID if that excess surface percolation is used to balance the East GSA overdraft. I'm trying to figure out the best way to get, is that something that's easy to answer on this call, or do we need to go deeper dive on that one? Debbie, do you want to take it?
Those issues are being discussed now between the two GSAs and how to allocate the groundwater within the two GSAs. And so that will be coming as we move forward.
Okay, great. And so Rhett, at this point, I think you know how to find us. So we'll keep in contact, and there will be more sessions like this. Okay, I'm going to run over just a few minutes. Thank you everyone for being so patient. Let me turn this back to Herb. Herb can go over the schedule and make sure we get Matt's question answered and any of the other next steps. So Herb, it's back to you.
All right, thanks, Lisa. Just real quick, I pulled up this main screen shared from our previous groundwater lunch hour when we had some slides, and it's also available if you find our September 2nd groundwater lunch hour event on turlockgroundwater.org. You'll be able to get this presentation. It's slide 6. But the process for all the rest of the chapter releases as currently planned are indicated here. So a lot of people were asking about the specific time for various chapters. The monitoring network chapter, the project and management actions chapter, as well as the remainder of that portion of the plan are anticipated sometime toward I would say the middle/end of October is the current plan. And a lot of the comments from previous chapters are still helping inform those chapters. So that's why it's a little bit in flux. And so just stay tuned for that. I would encourage everybody to get on our mailing lists through the website, signing up for our regular mails and newsletters in order to get the latest information on when those are actually coming out and what we're asking for by the way of comment. And so that's an answer to that question. And now what I want to make sure I do too is I have just a couple quick slides here that I just wanted to go over in terms of how to provide comments. Chapters 1, 2, 4, and 5 are out there and ready to be downloaded at turlockgroundwater.org/GSP. Obviously, today we talked almost specifically about Chapter 5, the water budget chapter. And so if you heard anything that piques your interest, we encourage you to download it and or view and or download it and provide comments through one of 3 mechanisms we have on our for the GSP. The first is obviously standard mail. There's an email or there's a mail address there. Email, we have a link to our Turlock Groundwater at gmail.com account, also available to be emailing comments in. We've received some thus far already. And then we have a web form on our site as well. And so at turlockgroundwater.org/GSP, you can get all the pertinent information about how to provide comment. And so we're looking to see those so that we could work towards addressing them.
Okay, and I think you would have a future as an auctioneer.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. Fast talking. Matt, did you get your question answered real quick? I just want to make sure your question was answered.
Just one follow up on that. So the opportunities to comment, are those only going to be on a chapter by chapter basis, or is there going to be like a final public draft release and comment period to comment on the whole thing?
Question. the way we've been doing things thus far is this chapter by chapter approach. Now, perfect example, we're trying to be as flexible as we can, but the perfect example here, if I were to go to this guy, is we'd asked early on, our consulting team was working on these first three chapters, the first three chapters excluding chapter 3, so chapters 1, 2, and 4. We had asked for comments by September 1st, but if we get comments on those because we released those in July, if we get comments on those sometime during this, we'll look to incorporate them. We're not going to try and be exclusive for comments, but we want to do that. So right now we're accepting comments for chapter 5 through the end of the month. If we get comments after that, I venture to guess we will do our best to address them in one way or another, but the later they come, the more difficult they would be. Now, that being said, if I were to bring up the calendar again, you see that there is a GSP adoption toward the end of the year. Of course, if comments come in on the entire document, that obviously is going to be something that gets looked at as well. And so there's no current plan to have another re-release of all 8 chapters, but yet again, all 8 chapters are going to be discussed by both GSAs prior to adoption. So that might be the way I would answer it. I don't know. I would lend to Debbie or others that are more in tune to the GSP development process to see how that goes, that are working more with our consulting team. But the answer is, if they come in, we will try and address them. Is probably the best answer I can give to that.
That's great. And Debbie, did you want to add anything to that?
Sorry, I was multitasking.
Yeah,
yeah,
so that's okay. He was just asking about if the schedule and comments, and bottom line is for comments that keep them coming. The nice thing about the deadline, it helps the consultant team roll them into the next draft. It just helps. But if you're a little late, it's not going to be the end of the world. What you say will still be considered. And we just wanted to verify that's correct.
Yes, so long as we have time to incorporate that into the final draft as we're finalizing it. We're getting towards the end, so the sooner one can take a look at each chapter as they're being prepared and get them to us, the longer we'll have to be able to consider the comments and incorporate what we can into the document.
Yeah,
thank you.
And I'll just note that there was a kind of a conscious decision early on of the group trying to realize, well, do we want to have a 90-day or 60-day comment period toward the end of everything and have a 1,000-page document for people to go through, or do we want to try and kind of take a bite of this one bit at a time, have individual 30 or more day comment periods on the chapters so people can kind of eat the elephant one bite at a time to do that. And so that's kind of was a conscious decision as we move forward. And so I just figured I would add that into the discussion.
That's great. Thank you. I did have a quick question from Spreck, and I just wondered if he was wanting to know, are there other places where several GSAs are doing one GSP? I can quickly answer that. Yes, that's actually what DWR had hoped, that there would be one GSA and one GSP. It didn't turn out that way, but generally speaking, DWR actually prefers when the GSPs are when the GSAs work together. And so, Spreck, if you want to know more about that, feel free to put more in the chat. Also, we've been getting tons of great questions in this meeting. I'm really excited about that because this has been so helpful for the technical team. And maybe Herb, you and I could talk about, maybe we could do some FAQs, frequently asked questions, or something that could be put up on the website, just because these are such terrific questions that are out there. And Spreck, if there's anything else you want me to respond to, please let me know.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. That's a good point. A former reporter guy, I love questions. And of course, I love also giving answers. Quick note, some of those answers might be on turlockgroundwater.org. We encourage you to go visit there. Yeah, I mentioned there's a get our emails link, which is probably the quickest way for you to get information once we send out notices and releases. And there's a ton of other tools that are there as well. So just a plug for that. We have videos up there as well. And then I think my last slide here is just reminding people of the ways you can connect with us. I think there was one, I think Lacey had mentioned that we have our Turlock Groundwater YouTube channel, which is where we will put this video for this lunch hour, as well as the previous one, which is up there as well, and other discussions on Chapter 5 and all the other chapters as we release them as well. And so just to encourage you to go there, and we take emails 24 hours a day at turlockgroundwater@gmail.com. So feel free to send any additional questions that way, and we would love to answer them. And so I think
This is Matt Brady.
Yeah, Matt.
May I make one last quick comment?
Sure.
With the release period being chapter by chapter, I mean, I think there's a lot of uncertainty, that you've seen in some of the questions today, because there are some chapters that interplay very closely with the water budget, like, the projects and management actions. And it's really hard to, make a coherent comment until you see the whole picture of how they all work together. I mean, I know there's still the opportunity to submit comment letters to the DWR after the GSP is released, but I mean, it would be really helpful, I think, just to be able to have the whole picture of what the whole GSP is going to look like, and then, make a comment on that before it's released, and hopefully have staff have time to potentially incorporate some of those comments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Matt. Matt, are you on some of the other technical teams? What are you working on?
I'm not. I'm with a grower in the East Subbasin.
Okay, great. Thank you. I actually think I've been in a meeting with you, but I couldn't connect the dots. So thank you. Kevin, did you have a last word?
Well, yeah, thank you, Lisa, and thank you for Herb and everybody else did a great job today. And I agree, good questions. Matt, I think, we had the time early on where we decided to release the chapters one by one. It's the first time anybody's done one of these. So for all of us, so we're learning from this, and it's not quite an environmental document, or it's not quite a project document. So it's a little hard to throw it out there and ask for comments when we don't even know what it's going to look like until it's done. But there will be, so that was the purpose of releasing chapters one by one, is to get initial comments, but there's going to be an ample, 30-day period when the administrative draft is out, so you can put it all together and ask more comprehensive questions or make more comprehensive comments. So don't fret. I think you'll have ample time.
Okay. All right. I just want to thank the audience. Just terrific conversation today, and just so appreciative of the thoughtfulness of everyone that's been on the call. I'll see if our panel has any last thoughts or last words or good wishes. And otherwise, I'll leave it to Marisa to tell us that she's going to end this meeting. So what do you say, Marisa?
Yeah, I think we can call it. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. We'll be posting this online, and thank you all again.